What's up, Sarah?
What's up, Tony?
Today on Gnarly Girls, we're talking about the Manosphere.
The manosphere is grape culture. Suck my toes and let me dominate you.
Hey, coming in hot. All right, I would like to discuss about the definition of the Manosphere because that's going to help us all be on the same page.
Yes. Would you like to give us your definition? Or would you like me to define it?
I think the Manosphere is a community of men who are reacting to feminism.
Yes.
And there are the incels. There are the MGTOWs, men going their own way. There are the acronym MGTOW. It's just like, again, I want to remind you that the reason why I've been playing in the waters of the Manosphere for a long time is I was making a bunch of videos about this 10 years ago, 12 years ago, about being a men's rights activist. So I really got in,
Not about you being a men's rights activist, about men's rights activists.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of sketch comedy. And so, that was a funny sketch comedy premise for me, was to do men's rights activism. I got deep in. And I was definitely, on a bunch of podcasts around men's rights activists around, 10 or 12 years ago. Oh, yeah. So this is how my knowledge began, was making these sketch videos and wanted to make sure that I was, representing the community with some knowledge.
And who was that super right-wing guy that you got really you were interviewing and you were working with? Was he working for Vice?
Yeah. His name's Gavin
Yeah.
McInnes.
Yeah. And
I'm not even sure if he would qualify. I mean, he is one of the founders of the Proud Boys, if not the founder of the Proud Boys. And the Proud Boys isn't inherently men's rights activism, but I would say it's part of the Manosphere.
I almost feel like the Proud Boys would be the Manosphere's gay. There's so much about looks enhancement and peak physical appearance that I feel like some of the Proud Boys would just be that's too feminine for me. To care about your rights as a man is too feminine.
Well, I think there's a lot of crossover. I think all the reaction to feminism and quote unquote woke politics and liberalism and shifting systems of leadership.
And I think what's important to say too is the Manosphere is coming from a strongly critical perspective of feminism. It is entirely about inequality and promoting misogynistic and anti-feminist ideas, as well as dominance and male dominance and the gender of men, the male gender dominating, men dominating being the natural way to be, and women being subordinate, or the feminine being subordinate being the natural way to be. And that hierarchy is just this sort of justified, moral, natural, divinely, especially created thing that we all must return to.
Yeah.
Hierarchy at the center of the argument, and that hierarchy is divine, and that dominating without consent is divine. That men dominating women or the masculine dominating the feminine without consent is the divine order of things.
Right now, the word divine feels really sassy.
It is sassy.
Divine. It's divine. So I think the reason why we're saying that the Manosphere is grape culture, and I think it's important to talk about our overall thesis that grape culture isn't just about the act of physical grape, but the whole psychological construct that supports grape as a consciousness, right? So when you're committed to the idea that you are better than woman, that is ultimately dehumanizing. And it doesn't only dehumanize the woman, it dehumanizes the self, right? As you're I'm better than these bitches. And that commitment to your own superiority is going to lead to competition. whether you eat, if you, even if you're convinced you're better than, you're still competing with. And so it creates competition versus collaboration or cooperation.
Yeah, it's like be dominant, get rich, control your life. This is what it is to be a man. We need to take back these central tenets because men have lost this because of feminism. So we must react to the fallacy of feminism and return things to their divine order.
So when I think about how Gen Z is like infinitely more conservative than previous generations, and that the divide of Gen Z, like usually what happens is that generations change in terms of their liberal or conservative politics. But Gen Z is the first generation where the gender divide has happened. So usually the genders are either both more conservative or both more liberally minded together, and that it's pretty even. And now I think this is the first time in history, at least since they've been like recording this, that you have more liberal women and more conservative men. Like that hasn't happened. And I was thinking about this morning. I'm like, what is going on with these Gen Z boys? I did have some stats I thought would be good to say. Hold on. Can I find them?
Find your stats.
Stats are, wait, hold on. Stats. Let me get the stats out. Let me get it out. Okay, so Gen Z men are twice as likely as baby boomer men to have traditional views on decision making within a marriage. With just 13% of men in the older cohort agreeing that a wife should always obey her husband. 24% of Gen Z men think women should not appear too independent or self-sufficient, compared to 12% of baby boomer men. 33% of Gen Z men also said a husband should have the final word on important decisions. 59% of Gen Z men said that too much was expected of them in terms of equality. And 21% of Gen Z men think a quote real woman should never initiate sex, compared to only 7% of baby boomer men. Well, these baby boomer men, of course they want the woman to initiate sex.
Wait, who's beneath the baby boomers?
Gen X.
Okay, that's what I thought. I do feel like even yesterday I had like an influx of Gen X men like calling me demonic on a Sunday. It always happens on a Sunday. They just like find me like the demon. It's either for me like Gen X men or Gen Z men usually, like when I do some research and kind of like
Well, what do you mean? Like how old are they?
Like they're not like grandma and grandpa quite yet, but like they could be approaching like I would say like 50s.
Okay. Yeah.
50s. Maybe is like 60s baby boomer.
Tail end.
Right. So it's like in that kind of like in between space, which is interesting because I almost feel like it's like the sort of like the older Gen Zs as well. Like there's sort of this in between generational space where things are getting like topsy-turvy. Because I do think a lot of millennial men at this point are like, I wouldn't say all of them, certainly, but I have noticed, at least within my own like POV of the world and communities, like there are more millennial men who are like, all right, this logically makes sense to get on board. Now, that is not to say I don't know millennial men in the Manosphere, because I certainly do. But those are interesting statistics. What do you think that's about when it comes to the baby boomers and the Gen Zers?
Well, I think that it's not accounting for the fact that baby boomers are potentially people who have changed their worldview. So they could be over time more feminist,
Mm-hmm.
and more understanding and more aware and more curious about the female experience. So I think that like with age, that can absolutely happen. And I don't know if that's being accounted for. It's not saying like these have been these baby boomer beliefs their whole life. The second thing that I was just like really contemplating about these Gen Z boys is like, again, all of this has been going on this whole time, so none of it's new. However, I think what's unique about this generation of boys is I don't think they have friends who are girls. And I don't see a lot of, in Gen Z and even Gen Alpha, I don't see a lot of cross-gender friendship happening. And I know that when I was growing up, I had guy friends. There was a lot of guys I talked to on the phone, and whether or not they had crushes on me or not, I was not dating them. We never dated. Nothing ever transpired. And we talked on the phone a lot. I would have guys sleep over my house with, like, we would have co-ed sleepovers a lot. We would have parties or gatherings with, like, guys and girls where it wasn't just like the guys in one corner playing video games and the girls like alone. Like, we were interacting, we were partying together. If a guy was drunk and puking and had to sleep over, he was cared for, like, we were genuine friends.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not saying that, oh, maybe they wanted to fuck, sure, okay. But they also, like, were interested in our humanity enough to, like, be real friends. Like, these guys were calling me on the phone all the time. And, like, we would get deep, we would get close, all of these things. I just don't think that the genders are friends anymore.
Well,
I see it.
what's so interesting is, like, we also were kind of like, I mean, we grew up in very different, like, areas in terms of, like, your like, evolution happened in a more urban environment than but and more north, yes. But, like, I do think we shared this sort of, like, skateboarder punk culture where, like, I do think inside of that, like, there is, like, this, yeah, there's just this intersection of the feminine and the masculine that, like, is specific. But, and also, I remember the very specific heartbreak of having all of these male friends in high school, and then even, like, through college, and then going to grad school and starting to make overtly feminist work. Like, some of my best friends who were, like, I knew they came from, liberal and leftist families. Like, it wasn't that they were, some, like, conservative Christian Republicans that I was friends with. Like, these kids came from good families and, like, good morals, good values, like, considered themselves, like, progressive or whatever. And a lot of these dudes just one by one stopped talking to me. Like, I remember trying to call one of my dear friends on the phone who I had been friends with since, like, preschool, and just, like you said, just talking to him on the phone, just checking in, seeing how he was going, how he was doing, how things were going. And just, like, all of a sudden people just stopped answering my phone calls. So boys that I was friends with just stopped communicating with me, blocked me on Instagram, whatever. And I wonder if this stuff that's happening with the Gen Zers and the Gen Alphas is because women are now able to have their own platforms on social media and share things. And then, in the spaces outside of school, these boys are seeing what these girls are posting and resharing, even if it's just memes to their stories that are more feminist in nature. And then it's, like, creating more division between the genders because women now have the ability to have these platforms and share feminist ideas. Whereas, like, that wasn't happening as much before. Like, maybe you would kind of be partying with someone and you weren't sure, like, if they were or weren't a feminist, or, like, I guess I was making assumptions about these kids being more, like, progressive than they actually were. These boys I was friends with, these boys.
Well,
like, I don't want to get too close to that, like, them just being like, that seems dangerous. What if she calls me out next? I'm going to keep a distance. Women who are feminists are not safe because they could just turn on me in an instant. Like, I could be their next victim, which is so funny because that's how women navigate rape culture. They're like, I'm going to distance myself from this man because I could be their next victim.
yeah. So I think what you're saying is that because of social media, women have platforms that they didn't have. And that with that platform, there is a danger of being outed.
Yeah. And, like, the sharing of memes, even just, like, you don't necessarily have to you don't have to type out your ideas and your thoughts in order to get them across, which is also relatively new. Like, not only is ChatGPT and AI everywhere, but now there is also this, like, memeable sharing of ideologies where you can just share someone else's idea to your story or to your Instagram feed or social media feed or whatever, and then through that, like, align yourself with those politics. So I think it's also a lot easier at a younger age to have a political identity and ideology, or even philosophical, and then not have to, like, sort of explain what that is. Like, the reshareable content aspect of all of it feels like it's a part of it. Like, there's less effort that needs to happen in order to be like, this is who I am, this is what I think, this is what I believe. And there's obviously, like, a very obvious need for feminism at this time. I think younger girls are also understanding in a way that I certainly didn't get when I was 13.
Yeah, I'm not convinced it's all social media based.
No, I don't think it's all
Because
social
I
media.
have a kid who did not have social media, who still does not have social media, and I noticed this going on throughout her school the whole time, and since like first grade. There's not a lot of integration between the boys and the girls being friends.
Do you think it's coming from the parents?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not like poo-pooing the idea that like the more overtly feminist girls are, how that might potentially like make boys scared in a different way. You know, like I'm not totally against that, but it's almost like it feels like it comes down to the way that things are just fundamentally less social.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's just less social interaction. Like I went for a walk the other day and you know, there's all these like really old houses where I live. And I live like in the woods, like it's very country. But there would be these houses and there would be ballrooms for hosting parties. You know, like there's literal ballrooms because people are like, oh, we have the room for the party.
Right.
And there would be parties.
Yeah.
And like everybody had birthday parties. And I went to the guys' birthday parties, went to the girls' birthday parties. My kid never got invited to a boy's birthday party. And she did invite all the boys to her birthday party and none of them came.
Yeah.
You know, like she had one, but the parents didn't even answer.
And how old was she in 2020?
10?
So like 2020 to 2024, like 10
It's beyond that. It's like it's bigger. It's wider than that. Like I think it's not just about COVID. I think social media and whatever the streaming services. I don't know what it is, but people have stopped partying together.
Yeah. No, like the awkwardness is at a high key. Like as a socially awkward person, and a very empathetic person, I feel like the social awkwardness is at like a level 10 right now.
Well, no, it's not. It's almost like people are afraid to have people come over.
That's what I mean.
I think it's beyond social awkwardness, though. This is pre-COVID, right? People were partying less together. I really think it has to do with entertainment and media and maybe phones. And maybe like this is where the social media could be coming in a little bit, or like the streamers or whatever, just the culture of like no one's doing things together, but like, and part of me is like, is it because I'm older? Is it because I don't drink or whatever? But just people are having less parties. And when I think back to how few birthday parties, you know, like it's different. It's just different.
Yeah.
Everything is less social.
Yeah. And I do agree with you that I do think it has everything to do with media, streaming services. Also, we can't forget that like Me Too predates COVID by a few years. And I think that at that point, like I actually did have a lot of male friends in college, and like pre-Me Too, like in that sort of era and like during Me Too, I think like there was a lot of shooketh-ness in the consciousness. And then I think the pandemic just had it's like layers of filters on top of each other to now where it's in this place of just like, now we're living through multiple genocides and wars and we're just like, whoa, holding on for dear life. And
like I would love to know if you're like a Manosphere dude or like a real feminist who's like, fuck dudes, like a beyond a feminist, like a hyper, like the Manosphere is like a hyper extremism. Do you have any friends that are girls?
They probably have pick-me girlfriends, I'm sure, because I
friends, a regular friend, just a regular friend.
I honestly, like, just without divulging too much into my own personal history and past, I've talked about growing up in the South enough. From the deepest, most insecure shell of myself, I could understand how there could be some girls hanging around as accessories because they feel so rejected by,
That's not a friend.
Yeah, I mean, then it would be the semantics of like, what are we defining as a friend? But I bet they do. I just know also they have them hanging out around them from watching this documentary too. It's like they always had like the groupies, but that's not a friend. That's not a friend.
It's not a friend.
Yeah. It's not a friend. I mean, I am pretty vocal about my disdain for men, and somehow I still do have male friends, but they are very overtly feminist in the way that like I always equate it to like, if you're going to be a man who is in relationship with like a feminist woman, like there's the same sort of relational dynamic is happening there when it comes to like men having to just be like, yeah, I'm gonna like hear this feminist out because I have more privilege, I have more access to resource, like I am inherently better positioned to succeed in the world than this woman. I understand systems of oppression, so I am gonna hear her out. Like it requires the man to have all of those things going on. In the same way, when it comes to white women and white people holding space for people of color and being like, it actually doesn't really fucking matter what I think in this moment because this person has less proximity to resource and privilege than I do. So like I'm actually just going to listen to what the fuck they have to say and like check my ego at the door. But if there's not like ego checking happening in relationship to the systems of oppression, I don't think that there can be a relationship. And I actually think my tolerance is growing increasingly thin for people who don't overtly identify as feminists, because my new sort of mountaintop that I'm standing on is like, if you're not a feminist, like you are racist, because you need white supremacy to hold up patriarchy and vice versa. And hierarchy in its own right is racist. But anyways, this is all to say it does, I think, require a deep acknowledgement of like the system that we exist within in order for men and women to actually really truly be friends right now. Or for men to be friends with feminist women, at least.
Yeah, and I think that like friendship, it's just interesting, and I'm not suggesting that like the friendship between the genders has been simple throughout time. It hasn't. It definitely hasn't. But what I am 100% aware of is that there was more interaction because there was just more social interaction that was happening. People were getting together on the weekends more. There was more social events. There was just more proximity. And within that, it's like, it's really easy to say whatever when someone's not in front of you. It's a lot harder to say it to their face. It's a lot harder, to confront someone or to say something disparaging, eyes open, staring at them. It's not easy. And I think most people actually keep those thoughts pretty private, and again, if your exposure is greater, right? If you're kind of like around ladies more and you're around people more and you're around your neighbors more and you have to like keep a lot of that in check because like you're in community and most people are like trying to be polite. It's almost like because we hang out less in real life, it's like the filter has been shifted. So there's less of that like, and I'm not saying it's necessarily I'm not saying it was necessarily better when it was like more repressed. I'm not suggesting that either. However, there was more opportunity for something to shift if you are just in like body space with someone.
Yeah. Just like even on like an object permanence level, like it is easier to dehumanize someone, and it's easy to be in a state of psychosis when it comes to your beliefs when you are isolated from what is actually happening. And in this Manosphere documentary on Netflix, like it is interesting to watch like kind of how lame these dudes are, and they're super insecure, and they all kind of like are Justin Bieber wannabes, like in that specific aesthetic, but they're really missing the mark. Like none of them are also cool. And I think that's the thing about the manosphere. In order to be in the manosphere, and I know cool is subjective, but like you really need to be like not cool. And I do think that's why in sort of like skateboarding culture and punk culture, we see a lot of this too, which are like pretty fucking cool, I'd say. There are a lot more, not to say that there aren't misogynists in that space and whatever, but I think there are a lot cooler dudes. Like I remember going to punk shows in college, and it was just like all these dudes were like kind of like bi feminists, like wearing like skulls on their shirts, like slay, you know, like those are my people. And I think that in this moment, it's like more important now than ever. And I've gone through like so many waves of my relationship to feminism, but it does feel important now more than ever just to be like, yes, feminism is an imperfect, developing, philosophical, moralistic stance on the world. It doesn't mean that we've arrived at a concrete definition and there isn't space for it to shift. Like by nature, I mean, especially according to like the definition of feminism by like Black women and queer people, like it is something that is meant to evolve as we evolve. And actually, I did pull a little bell hooks quote and screenshotted it for us for this. Feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. Like it is about the ending of these things. It's not about like, you know, this is what it should be and this is how it needs to be forever. In the same way, I actually just listened to Tony's Last Come Inside of Me podcast about matriarchy, which I thought was really interesting. And I agree with so much of what you're saying in terms of like this more like academic anthropological definition of matriarchy being like in direct opposition to patriarchy, where matriarchy then is a society where women hold the primary power and leadership and authority. And like basically it's now this like mirrored image of patriarchy, which is how academia unsurprisingly has described it. But then we have this more like feminist theory, philosophical idea of matriarchy, which does do what you're saying in that podcast episode, which it centers people who are disenfranchised. Like it's about centering the disenfranchised. It's about centering women and children. It's about, you know, all of these beautiful ideas that we both obviously deeply agree with. I think what you're pointing to on that podcast is we don't all agree on what matriarchy means. So a lot of people think matriarchy means the mirrored image of patriarchy. And then even in this like feminist ideological philosophical definition of what matriarchy could be, which we agree with, which is centering the disenfranchised and the most vulnerable amongst us, obviously, like that as an idea versus that in practice are two very different things, especially based on where we're at right now. So I do wonder if like inside of a lot of this, and I was feeling this when I watched the Manosphere, that we're like really getting into like the weeds of semantics where people aren't actually talking about the same definition of the same thing. And I think that's really true when it comes to feminism. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
Like there's not like a colloquial, ubiquitous, agreed upon global definition of feminism. Even amongst feminists, probably even amongst us, we have different ways we describe it.
But I also think that one of the issues around feminism within the manosphere is that there are complaints of women that these dudes and any dude has. That's a reasonable complaint. And I think that sometimes what happens is that I'm like trying to think of like I were a dude, you know, and I wanted to like explore certain issues, but you're basically like, and I think the problem is you feel gaslit because people are like, that's not an issue or something. But some of the things they're saying are issues, but where their analysis, I think, is shallow, is that they're not understanding that the behavior of women that they find problematic is actually a reaction to patriarchy, hierarchy, and capitalism. And I think that the same thing goes for the dudes. So when you have women who are really critical of these guys that aren't understanding. It's like, yeah, your complaint is valid, but your analysis is shallow, which is these people are also victims of patriarchy, white supremacy, racism, and capitalism and hierarchy. So I think like my frustration is that it's like people have these shallow analysis where they're angry at people versus deconstructing behavior patterns. And behavior patterns are merely reactions to a cultural program that you do not know how to navigate, or you don't have the emotional tools to navigate it in a way that's coming from a place of like deep empathy, compassion, and understanding. And I think that that's where, you know, I think that's like the collective gaslighting. It's like women have a reason to have issues, men have a reason to have issues because we are in relation to each other in the most intimate of relationships, which is not all of us. Obviously, so many people are not in heterosexual relationships. But when, most of these men are saying, I'm in a heterosexual relationship with a woman, and because it's like there isn't enough like genuine, it's like the genuine connection between what it is to be in an intimate relationship with someone is so complicated and so complex. And I think that's why there's so much anger.
Yeah, and I think that you describing it as a shallow analysis is everything, because I think a lot of the times what's happening in our memeable, reshareable, you don't have to think about it too long, you can just align yourself with a statement identity politics, is that we're missing context. And the context is actually everything. And I also think like, I understand, I'm again, like, I'm not going to not call myself a misandrist. I don't think I live in that place all the time, but I certainly do play around in that space and occupy it as a part of my own personal healing, and I stand by it. I'm also now entering a new territory in my sex work where I am realizing all of this time, like, even though I was made to be submissive in many, many dynamics, a lot of men are now asking me to dom them and degrade them and like talk down to them, which as a trauma practitioner is complicated for me because I do not kink shame and I am very kinky myself and I deeply understand. But at the same time, I'm always aware of like what I'm reinforcing, and that like there is a way that I get to like hold power in that situation where I haven't before. And like, even though ultimately it's part of my job, like there is also a deeper sort of reorientation I'm getting to power as well. And I also love the definition that you gave on the last episode of like systems of power corrupt people. And so like I'm just like always in that inquiry, like when and where there is a system of power or a dynamic of power, like there is the potential for corruption. And I think though what I would say to the misandrist part of me is that power needs to be redistributed, not flipped, especially when it comes to like exploring matriarchy, and just always remembering that the goal is to end hierarchy, not recreate it in a different way, which is like super hard to not do in the transition.
I would argue that the point for me is to not give power any power.
Yeah, well, and then we get into the definition of power, which I think we have different definitions of, but I understand what you're saying. Yes, I do. Like, there is a way that power directly has a definition as it relates to, like, people and systems of hierarchy. And I do think eliminating power inside of that, I agree with.
Yeah. And that the only way to do that is to not give power to power and to not crave power over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that, but like, what the complexity is, especially like, so I think the manosphere, again, there's like a lot of homophobia because the manosphere would not be possible without homophobia.
Yes.
Homophobia is homophobia and obviously misogyny, but even more so, I would say homophobia is the scaffolding that holds up the manosphere. Because if men were not so afraid of being gay or being perceived as gay, their journey of seeking each other's approval, affection, etc., would not be so problematic. So I definitely, and I think that what I don't like culturally is that we make fun of them for being like kind of gay.
Yeah.
And that's like not nice because you're making, it's like, haha, do you know what I mean? It's like that Simpsons kid.
Yeah, no, I really don't like it.
And it's like, no, like, I don't know if you've ever been to, you're not supposed to say in the Middle East anymore because that's racist.
Makes sense.
But if you've ever been to Arab countries, the men hold hands. They just like walk around holding hands.
I'm like cute. I'm like, why does that turn me on?
It's like
I'm immediately turned on.
Turkey, they do it. Greece, they do it. I remember being like, I was like, whoa,
I'd be like,
but it's not to say, I mean, like the Arab world is very homophobic.
yeah.
It's not as if holding hands is the answer, or physical touch is the answer, but it's just to me indicative of like, oh yeah, like whatever the cultural, I would say like the Arab world probably has more cultural historical context within one community, right? Because like the Arab world has been there for a really long time, where Americans are like all, except for the Native Americans, but like there are more people, their cultures are mixing. But I'm like, oh, that says to me that like men have been holding hands for a long time.
Yeah.
Like that just feels like that's like a culturally, historically, makes me feel that men have been holding hands for thousands and thousands of years, like millennium of hand holding. So even within homophobia and all these other things, they still hold hands, right? Which makes me think like there is this like deep, deep, deep craving for male affection, male attention, male access to like male tenderness.
Yeah. And, this is pretty obvious, but the homophobia of it all is also by nature misogynistic, because they're equating homophobia or homoerotic expression as being inherently feminine, which then in this manosphere sort of POV is seen as lesser than. And I don't think I do think there's confusion about what matriarchy is. And I do think there's a lot of people who are interested in that. And it's a trend right now and people are calling for it and not quite clear. Like, I think people are calling for it thinking, not everyone, obviously, but I do think like in the reshareable, memeable culture, there are people calling for matriarchy that do think, like academia has proposed, or the more sort of anthropological definition of it has proposed, is that it's like this inverse of patriarchy versus no, it's actually about centering the most vulnerable amongst us. But I do understand like you just were pointing to like the opposite sides and like the extremes on each side, and how like that is always going to keep us from like finding like what actually makes sense in the center. Because like idealism is not, I think it's powerful to hold an ideal image and like to meditate on that for the world, but I don't think idealism as a practical application is where we're at right now. And we have to remember that these men hate women. They hate women.
No, they hate the way women make them feel.
Right.
And that's different. And I don't think women hate men. I think women hate what men do. And I think this is the thing this is why I call it a shallow analysis, is that what we're actually hating is behavior and programming. What we're actually hating is a reaction to an incredibly sick society that's being manifested through behavior patterns.
I do think these men think that they hate women, though. Whereas this is what I was trying to say.
It's like so many women think they hate men, but they don't. They don't.
Yeah. Do you think there's more men that think they hate women than women that think they hate men?
I don't think it matters. I think the point is that like when we talk about hating human beings, it's dehumanizing.
I do think there's more men that hate women though than women that hate men. Or we would have fucking fucked this shit up by now. If there was enough
radically more violence towards women. There's no no confusion around that. There's no confusion.
Like, if I was to go into my most misandrous self, I'd be like, yeah, like, men actually do hate women more than women hate men. And, like, women actually have.
Women give birth to men.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, women give birth to men. Women give birth to boys. And I think there is an understanding that we have that, like, it would be very hard to, like, hate your male child. And even if you don't have a son, I don't have a son. I have friends who have sons, you know? We all have held a baby boy.
Yeah.
We've all held one, and we weren't like, "Oh, you little fucking shit," you know? It's like you held a baby boy, and you're like, "Oh, this baby boy." It's like even the baby eaters were babies.
Right.
The baby eaters were babies.
Right.
And you, at one point, someone held that baby eater, you know what I mean? And then that person became a baby eater. The steps that it took for a baby to eat a baby, you
My
know what
husband is just sneezing nonstop in the other room right now. He's like clearing the patriarchy for us.
Oh, it's funny. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
imagine the steps one would have to take for a baby to eat another baby over time. Because that's what it is. We're all babies. And some of us as babies abuse other babies, you know? And like that, the dementedness of that is like hard to hold. But again, it's like when we say we hate people, you know, I find that like at its core, I find that to be fundamentally problematic. You hate the behavior of someone. And you think about it even in a marriage and like in a partnership, if you're really mad at your partner and you're like, I fucking hate you, that's not gonna, nothing is going to grow, evolve, change,
Yeah.
transform from that energy. But you can say, I hate this behavior. I hate the way you've treated me. I have so much rage for what you've done. That's all valid. You know, like obviously anger, rage, all of that is valid. But I think when we misdirect it and we direct it straight into the heart of a human being, I don't know, you know? I don't know.
Do you think there is because I mean, maybe it's in my astrology. I have so much Sagittarius, like I'm such a shapeshifter. But sometimes I'm like, I like really feel the like matriarchy now, like call in my soul. Like I get it. Like this fucking anger and rage that's just like, let's just fucking go. Rah. Do you think like it is necessary for us to go through a state of heightened cortisol and rage and calling for things that maybe we don't even totally understand yet, and like being in like the messy process of that in order to like arrive at the shore of like what could be? Because I will say recently I've had conversations with multiple men where I've been talking about like feminine rage, and they've been like, yeah, well, that's not good for your like hormonal cycle or your cortisol or whatever, like that's not good for you, like you need to, like, yes, it's valid, but you need to like touch it and then move past it. And I'm like, no, I think actually there might need to be this moment of like sitting in the shit to be like, okay, this is what this feels like, so then we can move it from a deeply embodied place.
It's not about denying anger, rage, hate, any of these things. It's about where is it actually directed? Because if it is directed at human hearts, it's misdirected. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to be directed at behavior patterns, at programming, at conditioning, at laziness, at the way you were treated, all of these things. But the vibration of like not, and this is the difference between compassion and forgiveness. It's like, you don't have to fucking forgive someone that's abused you. You do not have to do that. If I see this, like, this is why I think Christianity can be really toxic. You'll have this like forgiveness, conversation. So you'll have like someone will go shoot up a black church, and they'll shoot a bunch of white person will shoot a bunch of black children. And the reporter that very day will be like, can you find it in your heart to forgive? And then because they're Christians, they'll be like, yes, because forgiveness is what's spiritual and what's holy. Forgiveness, forgiving someone that does not apologize, forgiving someone that's not sorry, forgiving someone who does not acknowledge the harm they caused. You don't have to do that. Forgiveness and compassion are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a mutual exchange between people when there is a shared reality that other person is asking to be forgiven, and you are doing it authentically, not to absolve them of guilt, not to absolve them of their own shame, but because you genuinely see, we've have a shared understanding, and I trust that this is going to shift, and I trust that this relationship can continue to progress in the way that feels safe and comfortable. And yeah, that's what forgiveness is. It's a it's a collaborative consensual contract, right? So the rape culture, the grape culture of of forcing people to forgive who don't forgive through the righteousness, quote unquote, of Christianity, where it's really just gaslighting. That's problematic. So I'm not suggesting that, again, like, people don't touch their anger and their rage and let it manifest how long it takes them to digest it, you know? However, it should be directed in a way that is, like, again, understanding that, like, every single human being is a baby, and that baby had to be demented in order to do the violence that they do. That's,
Yeah.
you know?
And like, holding compassion is so hard. I do think that is why it is considered a spiritual practice, because I feel for myself when I have to, like, when I choose to make the choice, to reach into that space of like holding compassion when I really don't want to, like, part of my prayerful practice is to like invite the goddess and source and my higher self and my benevolent ancestors to like help me hold it, because it does feel like a lot sometimes to
And I think
just.
it's entangled with forgiveness. You don't have to forgive someone you feel.
No, I know. No. But I just even mean compassion. Like, if we're defining compassion as the classical Buddhist, like, you need understanding in order to arrive at the compassion. Like, I'm just saying, even the process of, like, arriving at the understanding that has to precede the compassion, where, like you said, you're having this understanding that it's because of the perpetration on this person that they would perpetrate you in this way. Sometimes, truly, actually, deeply, it's hard for me to get to that space. And so, like, I'm just speaking out. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know how to do that, like, I do think there's something about compassion in general where it's like there is like letting larger forces help you hold that, because the universe, I do believe, is a benevolent, loving energy that it like desires like symbiosis and harmony. And I do believe we live in this consensual, like, harmonious universe. And so there is always this desire for equilibrium. So if we in our human selves can't find that, I feel like that's when we get to like bridge into our higher selves and bridge into like asking the forces to help us hold it and like expand our spiritual heart and our capacity. Because I do, when I feel like I can't do that, it does physically feel like my heart is like shrunken and like almost like collapsed on itself, like somatically, right? Versus like there is spaciousness.
Yeah, and I would think that's because the rage has been internalized.
Uh-huh.
And, like, I am not suggesting that internalizing it's like women have every right to be angry, just like non-white people have every right to be angry, just like people who live in abject poverty have every right to be angry. Like, it's like rational and reasonable, you know? Anger is not an issue. Anger is an emotion that's in its best form designed to protect you. It's an energy to protect you, so you make action. But that doesn't mean that your action has to be um a vibration of like toxicity, you know? Action can look, you can be so angry, and the action you can take doesn't have to harm another, you know?
This is where I do be thinking witchcraft and spell work is so powerful for people who have been abused, because you can just dig a little rabbit hole in your backyard and like scream into the mommy earth and like she will compost that. And like, yeah, there is something about like this moment feeling too big for each of us to hold by ourselves, which I think is where this interest in matriarchy is being called for. And I think that we would define matriarchy on the Gnarly Girls podcast as like this intersectional space.
Why? Like, we can't define words where we want to. We have to say, like, what we're looking for is something beyond it.
Yeah. Well, I guess
Darn.
the centering of disenfranchised people, the centering of disabled people, the centering of non-white people, the centering, as you said on your podcast, of queer and trans people, like just the centering of people who are the most vulnerable within this current system of oppression. And in that definition of it, it feels like a balancing versus an inversion, or like a mirroring, or like a conquering, right? It's like a redistribution of energy, a redistribution of focus, a redistribution, yeah, of energy, of where the energy and the resources being focused, and who is at the center, and like where protection and resource is going. And it does feel very like spiritual in nature. And like, you know, we were talking about prophecy on the last podcast, and then I was like, I'm just gonna like dig deeper into some like Haudenosaunee and like Iroquois prophecy and like Hopi prophecy, because that's this area of the Northeast that I reside in. And like, it is interesting that prophecy predates the state, like when it comes to Indigenous prophecy, because what they're doing is they're talking about cycles of time. So they're in Indigenous prophecy, there is like a prediction pre-state of these systems of oppression, and how there will be this time of disharmony, and like this need to find harmony. I think the problematic thing that white people do when they pick that up and then use that in their new age agenda, or then religion picks that up and uses it, is that I will go back to what you said about being a very shallow understanding. It's like, oh, well, then all this is fine because it's just going to actually, this was prophesized and now it's just going to, you know, change, and it'll just take time. But these are how things play out versus, and it's hard because a lot of this is like pre-history, pre-written language. Like it's a lot of like researchers like Robin Wall Kimmerer being willing to like reach back and talk to the elders and go into the community and like get the intel. But it does seem like what ultimately there is at the base of this is like there's like a cyclical understanding that the very like definition of the state itself as we see it today like didn't exist yet when like this moment was being talked about and prophesized about. So that makes me feel like we actually can't do any of this shit from an academic lens, from an Instagram lens. It's what we call for in Grape culture, and what we've said a million times on this podcast. We can argue the semantics all day, but it's going to require a spiritual revolution. And that does look like seeing everyone as their baby self, which is where I'm like, I do agree with you. We do have to see people as babies, even though sometimes I want to be getting out a fucking sword and just...
Well, I Manosphere right now is how tone deaf it is.
Yeah.
To be talking in the way these people are talking when there's literal like grape parades that are happening in the world.
Yeah.
It's tone deaf to act as if like men are victimized when you have what's happening with child trafficking and baby eating, and how many kids are being trafficked, and how many women are being trafficked, and how many men are being trafficked, and how many white American dads are watching child pornography, and how many. It's tone deaf to not look at the landscape of what's going on and the level of violence that's going on, and not think to yourself, I wonder how I contribute. And so it's like the level of denial that one would have to participate in order to be that tone deaf, I think is part of the anger, right?
It also feels lonely, doesn't it? And that does feel like it's part of the male loneliness epidemic. Like how lonely to not understand your place inside of things. And I could imagine it being like being a white woman who hasn't done the work to understand systems of oppression and racism and white supremacy, and how you also do not thrive within those paradigms of control and domination without consent. And like, I just keep drawing this parallel because every time a man is like, well, I can't get in, I can't get on board, and I don't care, and this doesn't apply to me. I'm like, could you imagine if like every white woman did that when it came to like dismantling her own white supremacy? And not to say that a lot of white women are doing that, but I do think that like a lot of women are choosing to divest because I think there could be more. But I do think that we have seen like more women, and this is just my personal POV, this is not based on statistics. I would say we've seen more women, specifically interested white women, in divesting from white supremacy than there have been men divesting from patriarchy. Because as women, we understand what it is to be oppressed more than men do. Just like when you see like a lot of like the people on my Instagram feed, like there are so many Black men in my Instagram feed who are speaking out about feminism and, you know, women's issues and women's rights.
Because there's less to lose.
Right. And there's more proximity to the oppression itself.
But there's less to lose. And so if we're asking ourselves, why are these guys holding on so tightly? It's because there's more to lose.
Yeah.
In their psychological framework and understanding of how society works. So again, we can have compassion for this fear of how much there is to lose in their eyes and how much their self-esteem, which is anyone who has false self-esteem knows it. And so when you know in your heart, am I? You know, like you feel it, and that's why they all come off as violently insecure.
Yeah.
And we all see them as insecure, but then calling them insecure is not the answer, because anyone who's called insecure that's insecure just doubles down. It's like, I think the problem is that people go where the love is. Donald Trump became a conservative fucktard because he went where the love was. He went where the acceptance was. If all these lefty liberals were like, we love this guy, we love him, we love everything he does, he would have been a lefty liberal Trump. It's like everyone goes to what feels safe. Like that's why I say we're all babies, because it's like actually all the deepest craving for love and acceptance. Like, and they'll tell you this, like white supremacy groups, hate groups. What did they want? Brotherhood. What do they want? Friends. What did they want? Community.
Right.
Oh, I can find a community by hating other people. Okay, fine.
Right. Like the perversion of it.
It's this constant seeking. So it's like these men hating women, this is what I'm saying, they don't hate women. They actually like are so just afraid of how much they want to be loved by women.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Like you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it, you can taste it.
Yeah.
They so desperately want to be loved and accepted, and they're so afraid, and they don't know how to navigate it, and they don't know how to negotiate it. They don't know how to be vulnerable. And this is why men are more likely to kill themselves. And the men that I've known who've killed themselves are the most quote unquote trapped by their masculinity.
And you're the first person I heard talk about this years ago, like before I even knew you personally. Just this idea that men are naturally more submissive, like to systems of oppression. And it's why there's like a lot more patriotism amongst men than women. And I am truly seeing that play out in my dom journey. Like beside myself, men asking me to put on a strap on and like threaten to peg them while I talk down to them. Like, I'm just like, this is what y'all want? Like,
that's a lot. Like, I mean, like, truly, like, when I think about, like, my sexual journey, I'm like, how about you just, like, maybe show me, like, I'll take off my shirt. And I'm like, well, that's exciting, you know? It's like, imagine how much has gone on in your life to get to a point where, like, that's what you're looking for.
I mean, I feel like I have intersecting trauma with my clients where I'm like, I want my trauma to get healed and your trauma to get healed and for me to make money and for you to get off on paying me for this. And like that, I guess, returns me to like this matriarchy now call and like the prophecy of it all and like the end of the Kali Yuga era. Like
what you're actually saying is that like this dynamic between me and this dude is healing for us both. That's not matriarchy now. That's collective, collaborative healing.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is like there is this moment of like Tony pulled me this tarot card once of like eyeballs with swords and the eyeballs were growing hair and it was just absolute chaos. Like it does seem like that is where we are on the wheel of evolution. Not to say that it hasn't happened before and it's not going to happen again and things aren't cyclical, but it is this gnarly moment, which is probably absolutely why this is called Gnarly Girls. Where I do think like it's like leaning into just like it's like there's a lot of unfinished business. I don't think it's about arriving at like definite perfect conclusions. I think this podcast and also your podcast and like our work in general is like this, where it's like it's an ongoing conversation. Like we're constantly updating the show, Grape Culture. We're constantly like reapproaching our ideas and examining them from different perspectives. And that does feel like the hairy eyeballs of this moment, which is very archangel in nature, to like just have the eyeballs everywhere and be willing to pick the thing up and like challenge your own perception and your own opinion and just like go every which way. But something I'm struck by as I was listening to you talk about the babies is like you are a mother, like you've given birth to a baby. And I do think like you don't have to have given birth to a child in order to tap into that POV of the mother and like the mother's heart. But I notice that like there is something about like there like the love of a mother that like comes through when I hear you speak about this, that like butts up against my like resistance to the next level of compassion that I know is a part of my healing and the healing of the world. And so maybe if you feel like me and a little just like hairy eyeballs with swords inside of it, it's like, like can we love from like the spiritual heart of the mother? Like, can we really like tune into that spiritual mother energy and be like, okay, like that is Christ consciousness, which ironically is what these Christians are calling for, but it's like the opposite of Christ consciousness, which is just an enlightened consciousness, a spiritual heart consciousness that has enough space for everyone in their process exactly as they are right now. Like no need to change or do anything before you come to the altar to just be like, I am ready to evolve.
Yeah. And I think the complexity is the fact that like how you were saying, like guys are like, it's not good for your nervous system to hold on to anger, and I'm like, well, like how convenient,
Right.
how convenient that you would say that, because women holding on to anger is like incredibly important for their own standard.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I also know I have to go, but I'm like, it's like 3 last words.
oh, you gotta go. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, bye.
No. Finish what you're saying. It's okay.
Oh, I was just gonna say that like I think we need to expand our view of anger, and that anger does not only mean violent action.
Yeah. Towards another, especially.
Yeah.
Towards another. Let's
Or
like
yourself.
or yourself. Our shows, our upcoming shows. Well, let me also just say, I know I already said this. My dom journey is very exciting. I'm getting a lot out of it. I didn't know that I would enjoy that people have a foot fetish and they like stockings and they want me to talk about my feet and how gross they are for liking my feet. I'm having a great time. One man was like, I'm seeing stars. You changed my whole world. Like, I'm deeply healed. And it also healed me too. And I made money. And I can't wait to wear a strap on. So if you want me to dom you, I'm going to link my new webpage for my OnlyFans in the description, because now I have a website webpage so I can nestle the OnlyFans link inside of that so that I don't get flagged by Instagram. She's a tech genius. And then also what I will link in the description is Tony has some courses she's put out. She also has some like amazing collabs she's doing. Shout out to Cock Block Corruption Coffee. So I'll do some like new links in the description around that. Then we have some upcoming shows. The next one coming up is going to be in Portland at the end of May 23rd at the Tomorrow Theater. We are so excited. And then should I say the other ones or should we wait?
We'll wait.
We'll wait.
Yeah, why not?
There's more coming. Okay. Love you. Love y'all. Bye.